Today we're going to talk about the Law of 72, the right way and the incredibly wrong way to use it. The Law of 72 is a mathematical fixed formula, and it applies only to certain kinds of investments. And we're going to make it crystal clear what the Law of 72 applies to and what it does not apply to. And yes, I am reading from a script. I don't want to miss a thing. And I need to do this in order to meet my production deadline, and I'm having serious problem with my teleprompter. So here we go, the script. Now we're going to get into a lot of math, and you might want to take notes, but I'm trying to do it slow, try to help you understand. But I'm going to show you something at the very end. It's kind of going to blow your mind. So you might want to stick around, because I'm going to actually show you how 7% average return actually can take away money from you. That's at the end, so stick around. So here I'm going to read from my script. Now, I'm going to show and I'm going to demonstrate everything I'm saying mathematically with a specific example using publicly available data and websites so you can make sure what I'm saying is right. So if you clicked on this video, I bet you already know what the Law of 72 is, but in case you don't, I'll explain it in one sentence. The Law of 72 means that if you divide the compounded interest rate of an investment into 72, then the result is the number of years it takes to double that investment. So if you were lucky enough to buy a CD back in the 80s that paid 9%, then that CD would double your investment in only 8 years, because 72 divided by the 9% interest rate equals 8 years. So if you didn't notice, there's one key word I said already. You may become a victim of a myth that is floating around if you don't understand that word. It's about this Law of 72. Yes, it is a law. It's an unchangeable mathematical law. But if you change just one word I said, then it becomes a very misleading myth. And people who talk about investments, mutual funds, IRAs, and 401ks often mislead their hearer by not properly stating the facts. The words they use about their investment products are misleading because they use words like rate of return, lifetime return, average rate of return, annual rate of return, accumulated rate of return, all-time price returns, or whatever they say. They can mislead you. And if you do not clarify that the returns they are talking about are not compounded, then they are misleading you. That's the word they don't want to talk about, compounded. You see, that mathematical problem you saw on my video thumbnail, you know, the reason you clicked on this, the one, that mathematical formula that said 7% or 7.7% COM, meaning compounded, is greater than 12% AMN, meaning average annual return. That's what I'm talking about. I will demonstrate that mathematical fact and expose the myths by using data from a typical mutual fund data sheet. So let's look here at American Century Ultra, an aggressive growth mutual fund. It's been in existence since November of 1981. So that's about 40 years ago. And according to its own advertised data, it has a lifetime return of 12.7%. So what does that mean? Does the Law of 72 apply to this number? A lot of people believe that it does, but no, that is the myth if you believe it. That so-called lifetime return is not what a lot of people think it means. It's not a compounded return. It represents something altogether different. So what is this fund's actual return? And what do I mean by that? How do we compare investments like apples to apples? Well, the sad fact is that a lot of people believe that you could take that mutual fund return, like this 12.7% lifetime return, and just drop it into an investment calculator website, like this one on Dave Ramsey's site. Now, people think that you can just drop that number into Dave Ramsey's site and see how your money can grow exponentially, like this. So let's go to the website and I'll do it for you. So here we are at the Ramsey Investment and Retirement Calculator. So let's try something here. Let's put in, let's say your age is 25. We'll put in 25 right here. And then you put in 65 on this line. That'll give you a 40-year time period. Now let's just say you start with $5,000. So let's put $5,000 on this line. And we're just going to leave it alone. We're not even going to add to it. So on this line, put 0. We're not even going to contribute any more money to it. Put 0 right there. And then what's your annual return going to be? So right here, let's put, instead of 12.7%, let's put 12%, 12.0. Now all you got to do is click calculate, and we'll see what it would be with a 12% compounded rate of return. Now that's pretty cool. $588,000 worth of growth. The total would be worth $593,239. Well, that's a lot of money. Well, that's if you had a 12% compounded rate of return. But guess what? Your return is not compounded. 12.7 or 12% or whatever the return is, average rate of return, lifetime return, all those things, that has nothing to do with this website. This website is only talking about compounded rates of return. So now just ask yourself a question. How many times did that $5,000 double in that example? Well, let's just count the doublings on our fingers. Let's start with $5,000, then double it once to $10,000, double it the second time to $20,000, double it a third time, it's 40, then it's 80, then it's 160,000, then it's 320,000. That's 6 doublings. The 7th doubling would have been 640,000. It didn't quite make it. It made 593,000, but so it almost doubled 7 times. Almost. It's 6.8, whatever. So it doubled way over 6 times, and your final amount is actually 118 times your original $5,000 investment. But that's only if it was compounded. Keep that in mind. And that's what you would have expected from your mutual fund investment if you believe the myth. The myth that the investment gurus try to put forth, that, wow, look at this investment. It's 12%. And did you know that your money doubles every 6 years at 12%? Yeah, it does if it's compounded. But that's not compounded. Not a way, not a bit. So here's what you got to know. That investment calculator, as well as many others like it, only figure out returns that are compounded. So that $593,000 is not what this fund would have returned, because that 12.7% lifetime return means entirely something else. It has nothing to do with compound interest. I'm not saying this fund is lying. I'm saying that what people think that 12.7% number means is wrong, because they believe the myth. Maybe they've been told the myth by their investment counselor. And I'm not trying to pick on this fund. I know people make this mistake all the time, regardless of what fund they're looking at, because the investment gurus often talk about the law of 72, but it doesn't apply to mutual funds. The law of 72 only applies to compounded interest. So let's do the actual math on this fund and see what its actual return was, because it's been around for about that 40 years that we put on that investment calculator. So let's go back to 1981. What was the share price? The Wall Street Journal said it was $5. So if you put in $5,000 into this fund, you would have bought 1,000 shares, because 5,000 divided by a share price of 5 is 1,000 shares. I verified that beginning stock price by going to the library myself and getting old microfiche records of the Wall Street Journal from 1981. So now, here it is about 40 years later in 2021. And how much money would I have if I had put $5,000 in that fund and left it alone for the entire 40 years? It should equal that 12.7% lifetime return, right? That's what they printed out. But how much money is that? Let's do the math. So after 40 years, I would still have at least that 1,000 shares, right? But I'm going to increase it a little bit. I'm going to increase it by 7% to adjust for the additional shares that would have been bought due to the reinvested dividends. This is a technicality I figured in because, when looking back at the share price at the library, but in Yahoo Finance is different. Yahoo Finance says that the beginning share price, as adjusted for splits and dividends, was not $5, but $4.69. That's less than a 7% difference. But anyway, let's give ourselves 7% more shares. So instead of 1,000 shares after 40 years, let's say we now have 1,070 shares to give that extra 7%. So what is our account worth 40 years later? In other words, what is the real return of this fund after 40 years? Well, that's easy to figure. Just take today's share price and take it times the number of our shares. So lately, 20th Century Ultra, their share price has been around $85. And it never split. It's never split 2 for 1, 5 for 1, or nothing. It's been always the same. So 1,070 shares times $85 is, voila, $90,950. So now, after 40 years of gains, you'd have just over $90,000. Wow, suddenly some of you realize that's a $500,000 difference. That's $500,000 less. Well, sure, we still have decent gains, the $90,000, it's actually 18 times our original investment, but your money has only doubled 4.25 times, not 6 or 7 times. Your return is not bad, but a far, far cry from what many myth believers expect. How much would you have thought that money, or if it was your money, how much do you think you'd have in your retirement account after 40 years on a $5,000 investment? Do you think it would have been over $500,000 or just the $90,000? What do you believe about that lifetime return? What do you think it meant? Well, I just proved it mathematically. What it really meant is you start with $5,000 and you end up with $90,000 in 40 years. That's it. That's what they actually returned. To compare investments to each other, like comparing apples to apples, we should all be talking about the same thing, using the same terms so there's no misleading talk. And if we all use the same terminology, we can. I think a fund's return should be stated in such a way that you can compare it directly to compounded interest and nothing else. The actual returns of this fund is equal to only a compounded interest rate of only 7.65%. And that's why the title on the beginning of my video, that formula says 7.7% COM is greater than 12.7% AN, because it is. If you would have bought a CD and got it at 7.7%, you would have had more money, more than the $90,000, than putting the same money into this mutual fund, which pays 12.7% lifetime return. Because it's not compounded. It's not comparing apples to apples. One is compounded, the other is not. So, like I said, this fund, 20th Century Ultra, only yielded a compounded interest rate of 7.65%. And the 7.7% CD would have been better and far safer and more stable. So hopefully this didn't happen to you. I hope you weren't a myth believer and expected to retire with $500,000 and then wind up with only 90 grand. I hope that didn't happen to you. So be on guard. Don't ever let an advisor tell you something like, hey, look at this fund here. It has an average annual return of 12%. And if you use the law of 72, your money doubles every 6 years. There. Whew. That's that baloney again. That's that myth. I know I've said it several times, and for the last time, the law of 72 does not apply to average returns. It only applies to guaranteed compounded returns, like what you get from a CD or a passbook savings account. Don't let them blow smoke. The terms they use are misleading. If a salesman talks about mutual funds and the law of 72 at the same time, he's not worth listening to, because he's trying to pull something on you. He might not even realize it himself, but he's pulling a huge fast one on you, making you think, oh, I'm going to have $500,000. Nope. You'll be lucky to get 100,000. 90 is what it really is. So just forget all that jargon and misleading stuff. Forget the things that say things like rate of return, lifetime return, average rate of return, annual rate of return, accumulated returns, all-time price returns, all that stuff. It's not the same as compounded returns. And that's how you should compare investments. So here's bonus round. What I promised in the beginning. Did you know that an average return can actually make you lose money? Yeah, watch this. Here's how. Suppose you've been told that there's a new fund here, and it's been around just 3 years, and it has an average return of 7%. What if I told you you could wind up with less money in your account after those 3 years than what you started with? That's right. Look at this. Suppose those returns were broken down year by year in average. That's how you would get an average, right? So, for example, if the first year return was a positive 21% and the second year return was a negative 60%. Ooh, there was a market crash in the second year. And then it turned around after the crash. And the third year return was a positive 60%. Then what is the average annual return? Do the math. It's how everything is averaged. Add the numbers together and divide by 3. So 21 plus a negative 60 plus a positive 60 is what? The 60s cancel each other out. So the end result is 21. That's the sum of the 3 numbers. So you take the sum and divide it by the number of digits, which is 3. 21 divided by 3 is 7. So, and by the way, the mathematical result of that problem would be all the same whether you put the numbers in any order. Whether the negative 60% was first, middle, or last, it doesn't make any difference. In this type of equation, the order is irrelevant. It's always going to be the answer to the problem, when you add them together, is going to be 21, divided by the 3 digits is 7. Now, you know you've got an average annual return of 7%. But guess what your account has done? You've actually lost money by being in that fund for 3 years. Because if you started with $1,000, at the end of 3 years, regardless of the order of returns, you now only have $774.40. You actually lost over $225. You lost 22.5% of your money, not gained 7% per year. Now I realize that I've just created a hypothetical extreme example, because in most cases a mutual fund does not swing from a 60% gain to a 60% loss or vice versa, but it could. Average returns are fine to look at if they are more stable. Like instead of this ultra wild swinging back and forth, if a fund had an even keel pattern with all positive numbers like this pattern, +7, +6, +8%, yeah, now that would be good, and you get the same exact average of 7%, because 7 plus 6 plus 8 is 21, divided by 3 is 7. Got the same exact average. So I use this just to illustrate, just to remind you, just to ignore what they say about average annual return. That's the thing that they most often talk about, because that can actually make you lose money. And you know what? I have never found a fund that their actual returns are equivalent to 12% compounded. I see a lot of funds advertising 12, 13, even 17% average annual return, but it's still nothing compared to compounded returns. Keep it real. Don't fall for the myths. Be smart and do real math. Don't waste your time dreaming of those huge returns. That law of 72 is not for you and your mutual funds. It's not for you and those funds. You got questions? Put it in the comments below or just email me. I'm ray@livingalien.com. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you'll keep getting notified of new videos as I make them. Don't fall for the myths.